Welcome to the How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast, the show where brilliant professionals share how to sharpen the universal skills required to flourish at work. Enjoy more career fun, wins, meaning, and money with your host, Pete Makaitis.
Hello, and welcome to episode 886 with Adam Bryant. If you aspire to become an executive or a CEO, a leader of sorts, Adam has got a wealth of wisdom for you. He's talked to over 1,000 CEOs, interviewing them, identifying some themes, some patterns, and sharing his collected wisdom with us here in that conversation. So you'll learn 1, what every aspiring leader should know about themselves. 2, how to get promoted without asking for promotion. And 3, the key ratio that positions you for advancement. So if you want to check out the show notes or the transcript or the links to items that we mentioned here, please visit us over at awesomeatyourjob.com/EP886. And if you're at awesomeatyourjob.com, check out some of our goodies like the full text searchable transcripts, the gold nugget email summaries, the 10 days to winning at work email course, and so much more at awesomeatyourjob.com. Now here's a bit about Adam. Adam Bryant is Senior Managing Director and Partner at the Exco Group, where he works with hundreds of senior leaders and high-potential executives. As the creator and former author of the iconic Corner Office column in the New York Times, Bryant has mastered the art of distilling real-world lessons from his hundreds of interviews and turning them into practical tools, presentations, and exercises to help companies deepen their leadership benches and strengthen their teams. He also works with executive leadership teams to help drive their transformation strategies based on a best practice framework he developed for his widely praised book, The CEO Test: Master the Challenges That Make or Break All Leaders. Big thanks to Adam for sharing his wisdom with us, and big thanks to our sponsors. Check them out. One sponsor to check out is Harvard Business Review. This brilliant magazine, published at hbr.org, is the leading destination for smart management thinking. Fun fact, HBR has been mentioned in 108 episodes of the show. That's because HBR has great stuff that comes up often. They've got explainer videos, podcasts, real-world case studies, and much more. I think of HBR each night that I put on my special orange glasses. Their article, Will Blue Light Glasses Improve Your Sleep?, revealed that those who wore them reported better sleep and a 7% improvement in work performance as compared to those who wore the sham glasses. So I cite HBR anytime anyone tells me that I look silly wearing them. Now, much of HBR's content is available for free when you sign up at their site. Subscriptions that get you unlimited content cost $10 a month. If you visit hbr.org/subscriptions and enter the promo code AWESOME, you can save 10% off of that subscription. Again, to save 10% off of your HBR subscription, go to www.hbr.org/subscriptions and enter the promo code AWESOME. One sponsor to check out is Storyworth. Whenever I'm thinking about meaningful Father's Day gifts, Storyworth leaps to mind. Storyworth helps you preserve precious memories and stories from your father for years to come. Each week, Storyworth emails your loved ones a thought-provoking question that you get to help pick, such as, what's the bravest thing you've ever done? I personally love the prompt so much that I have refreshed Storyworth's questions page many times looking for more. Storyworth makes the writing process super quick and easy. All your loved one needs to do is respond to that email with a story, and then you get a quick copy of that. And after a year of this fun, Storyworth compiles your loved one's stories and photos into a beautiful keepsake hardcover book that you'll be able to share and revisit for generations to come. Families love Storyworth so much, they've got 25,000 five-star reviews on Trustpilot and have millions of stories preserved. So give all the fathers in your life a unique, heartfelt gift they'll all cherish for years. Storyworth. Right now, you can save $10 on your first purchase when you go to storyworth.com/awesome. That's storyworth.com/awesome to save $10 on your first purchase. And big thanks to our sponsor, Acorns. Acorns makes it easy to start automatically saving and investing for your future. You don't need a lot of money or expertise to invest with Acorns. In fact, you can get started with just your spare change. Acorns recommends an expert-built portfolio that fits you and your money goals, then automatically invests your money for you. NerdWallet.com, whom I love on these sorts of matters, gives Acorns a whopping 4.7 stars and says, quote, if you want to make the most of your spare change, there's no better place to do that than Acorns. Head to acorns.com/awesome or download the Acorns app to start saving and investing for your future today. And we got a legal disclaimer here. It may not be representative of all clients. Tier 1 compensation provided. Compensation provides an incentive to positively promote Acorns. View important disclosures at acorns.com/awesome. Investing involves risk, including the loss of principal. Please consider your objectives, risk tolerance, and Acorns' fees before investing. Acorns Advisors LLC, Acorns, is an SEC-registered investment advisor. Brokerage services are provided to clients of Acorns by Acorns Securities LLC, member FINRA/SIPC. For more information, visit acorns.com. Now, here's Adam. Adam, welcome to How to Be Awesome at Your Job.
Thank you for the invitation, Pete. Been looking forward to this.
Oh, me too. Well, I'm excited to hear the wisdom you've collected in your book, The Leap to Leader, How Ambitious Managers Make the Jump to Leadership. But first, we need to hear about you in ping pong. What's the story training with a ping pong coach?
Yeah, it's a sentence that I never thought I would utter in my life, which is that I have a ping pong coach. But we moved down to New Orleans a few years ago, where my two daughters are, including now my son-in-law. And he was blessed with great hand-eye coordination for things like golf. And in the townhouse we have, my wife generously gave me the loft for my office, and I put that in air quotes. But I have my desk up there. I also have a pool table, a foosball table, and a ping pong table. I just got determined to get better at this. And I found a ping pong coach in New Orleans, and I train with him a couple of days a week. And it's pretty cool. At my age, I recently turned 60, but it's cool to get better at something. And my son-in-law, who used to beat me pretty consistently, I now beat him, I'd say, a little more than half the time.
Oh, well, congratulations. And I'm just imagining these training sessions with the ping pong coach with sort of Rocky montage type music in the background. And he's like screaming at you to push yourself to the very limits. Is that how it goes down?
Not so much. But he's a good coach. He's from Vietnam. And there's a word he's taught me, which is chole, which means sort of let's go. And when you hit a really good shot, you celebrate and yell chole. The other thing, you're taking me down a rabbit hole, Pete, but the one thing that is very cool about the world of ping pong is that when you hit a lucky shot, generally you sort of put up your hand just to sort of signal to your opponent that you acknowledge it was a lucky shot.
Oh, that's friendly.
I think it's very refreshing compared to some sports like soccer, where people are always just like fake flopping and things like that. So
Right. Or say, yes, I know, I'm so amazing. Look at me. I could pull it off. Well, so tell us, I imagine there's a lot of practice you invested. Are there any sort of tips or principles for folks also looking to be awesome at ping pong? What would you suggest for them?
Well, there's kind of basement ping pong where you're just sort of flailing your arms, but to do it properly, I know this sounds silly, but it is an incredible workout because you basically have to be squatting very low and also be on your toes. And footwork is a huge part of it. So you've got to be super agile on your feet while you're squatting, while you're on your toes, and to get yourself in a position to hit the shot. So it's one of those things, like a lot of things in life, from afar, it looks pretty easy, but it is an incredible workout. And I get the same calorie burn from that as like a Peloton workout. So
no kidding. All right. Good to know. Well, so now on to
less important matters. How to be awesome at your ping pong, right, Pete?
Now for some insights which could have maybe an even greater transformational impact on people's careers. So you've interviewed over 1,000 CEOs over your life and career. That's pretty cool. Can you share with me any interesting themes associated with what's kind of different about these people than others, and how do they generally get to become one?
And just to give you the context, so when I first started interviewing CEOs, it was for a series I created at the New York Times called Corner Office, which was based on a very simple what if, which is, what if I sat down with CEOs and never asked them a single question about their company, which is how CEOs are usually interviewed, and just focused on sort of their leadership lessons and early influences and how they talk about and think about the sort of universal challenges of leadership. So that was my initial focus. I also, from the very start, embraced diversity in literally every sense of the word in the people I interviewed. And so looking back now and kind of saying, well, what are the patterns? I think one of the clear patterns that emerges is this skill, this habit of mind to be able to simplify complexity. And to me, it is one of the common threads. I don't think you can lead effectively if you don't have that, because I do think it's a leader's job to take the complexity of the world, their industry, what's happening in their company. And it's just one of those key leadership moments to be able to stand on a stage, whether it's, literal or virtual, and basically answer the questions that little kids ask in the back seat, right? Like, which is, where are we going and how are we going to get there and when are we going to get there? And I know that sounds simple, but simple is hard. And I just think it's such an important skill, because if you know how to simplify complexity, then you're also going to be a good communicator. So to me, that's like one of the core skills that you have to have. In terms of how they became CEOs, I mean, what's been so refreshing and what I've really enjoyed just hearing people's paths and their stories is that, yes, I met a few CEOs over the years, Pete, who just seemed like from central casting, right? Like they were the class president, they were their frat house president. They were just those kids who from like an early age just said, you're going to be a CEO someday. And I met a few of those, but I have to say they were kind of in the distinct minority. I met a lot of people who you just never would have guessed. Like they were former elementary school teachers. They studied classical organ in college, just really unusual backgrounds, theater. And suddenly they're like, not suddenly, but now they're running a huge company. And I have thought a lot about this because I think people are hungry for career advice, right? And I think part of the thing that they're looking for is an answer to the question, am I on the right path, right? What is the right path? If I want to move up, if I want to get that CEO job, what is the right path? And what I always tell people is, there's some obvious directional things you have to do. Like if you want to be a CEO of a really big company, you should get a job at a really big company at a young age. So like once you check the obvious things, what I always tell people is that there is no right path. The most important path is the path that you are on. And the thing that really separates people that I find is whether they keep their eyes open and they look around and it's this kind of like machine learning of like whatever their experience is and keeping their eyes open. They're just always sort of sifting that experience. It's like, what am I learning? What am I noticing? Boy, that boss seems to be really effective. What is it that he or she does? That seems like a really bad boss. Why is that? This team is effective. And so to me, it's just that quality of keeping your eyes open. I often reflect on a saying that I heard from a college president named Ruth Simmons. And what she would tell students is that you should always be prepared at any moment of your life to learn the most important lesson of your life. And I think it's just a great sort of guide for your life, just to keep your eyes open and learn, because there are lessons everywhere.
Yeah, that's powerful. And I think a lot of times in my own experience, that can come up in just the form of a wild idea. In terms of, I'm noticing this and I'm wondering that. And then, well, what do you know? And now this is a business. Well, how about that? That was interesting.
Yeah. And to me, a lot of that comes from silence. Like, yes, there is that sort of habit of mind. And as you just described, like you're always questioning, like, why is that? And is there, you see sort of like a seam or a gap in the world. It's like, why is that there? And it is that sort of curiosity, that relentless questioning. But I also think that a lot of that making the most of the experience that you've had, processing it, looking for the patterns, probing it, it does require time for reflection. And I think a lot of people, silence isn't comfortable and they pick up their phone and they start scrolling or something. And so I always tell people, it's like, you need to get comfortable with silence and just to have those conversations with yourself about this so you can process what you've been learning.
And when it comes to the simplifying complexity, could you give us an example of here's complexity and here's it on the other side of a CEO simplification? See how that's great?
Sure. And I often use the example of Bob Iger, the CEO at Disney. So the backstory, before he became CEO at Disney, he was the internal candidate. And I think the board actually wanted an external candidate. So he went on this campaign for the job. And he basically created this very simple, like 3-part plan. He said, if you make me a CEO, these are the 3 things that I'm going to focus on. He said, great content. You could say, well, that's obvious, right? Like you're Disney. But the second one was global expansion. So we're going to place those bets. We're going to go into new markets. And you can say, well, that sounds obvious too. But the third one that he said is that we are going to embrace technology in all its forms, new technology. So whatever new technology comes along, whether it's streaming, even if it undermines our traditional business model in the short term, we are going to embrace it. And what's been interesting is that Pete, he has never ever wavered from those 3 things. If you read his book, Ride of a Lifetime, which is a good book, there's good insights. It's not that sort of CEO victory lap kind of book. You can just sort of see like the growth of the company. It's like all along those 3 pillars. And he's just relentless about communicating that. Last time I checked, the second sentence of his bio on the corporate website referred to those 3 things, like great content, global expansion, embracing new technology. And so to me, like that is a good little case study of what that looks like. Because again, like it's a sweet spot. You can look at that and say, well, isn't that obvious? And it's like, well, actually great content, maybe yes. But the other 2 are very clear bets and clear paths. And the great thing about when you get it right, when you do simplify complexity as a leader, then it's actually really great for morale because everybody kind of understands how you're going to win. They understand how the work they are doing can contribute to the success of the company. And there's this popular expression, you've probably heard it, that culture eats strategy for breakfast. You hear it a lot of conferences. It's always attributed to Peter Drucker. Turns out there's no record that he ever said it. And I increasingly believe it's wrong, that you need to have that really clear strategy, that simplified complexity, so that everybody can understand how they are helping the team win. And if you do that, I think that's great for morale and culture.
All right. So in the Disney example, the simplified version is great content, global markets, embracing technology. What would be the complex version that a CEO who is floundering might put forward?
Listen, you've probably seen them yourself. I certainly have. I mean, a lot of companies pull together strategy decks, right? And they're 40 slides long and they use 8-point font. You can't even read it from the back of the room. There's lots of pyramids and their colors and corkscrew arrows and just too much, right? And it's the kind of thing that they may make sense in the moment, but the key thing is like, do you remember them, right? And we all know, all the neuroscience shows that most people can't remember more than 3 or 4 things day to day. And you can have that really complicated strategy document, but you have to pass the hallway test, right? So you just imagine if you pick some random person in the hallway and stop them and said, do you know what our strategy is? Would they be able to echo it back to you? And that's why it's just so crucial to be able to distill that strategy. I interviewed one CEO, and she had this great line. She referred to her father, who used to talk about like cows, chickens, and taters, right? And she internalized that as just a reminder. It's like, just use really simple, everyday language, keep it simple. Because there is this bias in the business world. People like, reaching for that $20 word. It makes things sound better and more formal and fancier and all those things. And it takes so much discipline to hit that sweet spot of simplifying complexity. So people go, okay, I get it. I get how we're going to win. And I get how the work that I'm doing is helping the team win.
So even if those synergies are highly impactful, you don't want to say it like that.
Exactly.
Okay. Understood. All right, well, so thinking about specifically your book, The Leap to Leader, any particularly surprising or fascinating discoveries that you came across in the direct preparation of the book or in the background leading up to it?
I think writing books is a process of discovery, right? You sort of write books to figure out what you know and to really put a sharp point on things. And I will call out a few things. The first section of the book is called, Do You Really Want to Lead? And I think it's an important question that people should really ask themselves, because there is this kind of like momentum that just happens either personally or institutionally within organizations where you just kind of get carried along. And if you're a high performer, it's like, well, of course you want to lead. Of course you want to move into that management position and then a leadership position. And I think people really need to stop and spend some time, again, silence, right? Spend some time with themselves to be really clear about why they want to lead others and whether they want to lead others, and not just be carried along by that sort of river of promotion into the bigger title, right? Because I think a lot of people, it's like, of course I want that job because there's a bigger title and there's more money with it. Or they may want to lead because they like the idea of like having more power or whatever. And I just think that leadership is so hard. And a lot of people get into leadership positions and they go, wow, like I had no idea it was this hard, right? You're dealing with people's problems. You got fires you're putting out every day. The day is kind of a 3-shift day. You're tossing and turning, staring at the ceiling at 2 or 3 in the morning. And so you need to be very clear in your mind about why you want to lead. And so just having that moment, I think is really key. Another insight I'll share is this idea of how to be awesome at your job. And I'm sure you talk, and big part of the audience are people who want to move up in their career. And one of the things that I came to appreciate is that, look, we're always taught you got to have your elevator pitch ready, right? People are told that early in their career, have your elevator pitch ready. And to me, that generally means one of 2 things. One is your elevator pitch, like, what are you working on in case you're on the elevator with a CEO? Hey, what are you working on? You got to have that ready. And the second elevator pitch is like, well, what do you want to do? Like, what are your career goals? Got to have that elevator pitch ready. And what I've come to really appreciate is that people don't spend enough time on their third elevator pitch, which is that if somebody were to ask you, who are you as a leader? What would you say to them? And you may go through your entire career taking over new teams and nobody will ever ask you that question. But what if they do? And to me, that then raises the question, well, how do you answer that? Like, what does a good answer sound like? And to me, it's about being able to say, look, these are the 3 values that are really important to me. And you don't just stop at the words because, look, there's a lot of fridge magnet poetry in the leadership field, right? There's a lot of like words that people just sort of toss around and they sound right and good. But I think when people reflect on and think about how they're going to talk about their personal values, it's not enough to just say these words, these ideas are important to me. You then need to be able to back them up and say, these are the stories of how these became important to me. And this is why they're important to me. And this is what it looks like in action. And this is how I found these values to be really important and effective for driving success in the teams that I've been part of. Really bring those ideas to life. I talk about it as like your personal leadership brand. Like, what do you stand for as a leader? And when you're not in the room, like, how would a direct report describe you to a job candidate? And so you want to be clear about what you stand for. And I think in this day and age, just in the last few years, there's been so much more talk about humanity and transparency and vulnerability and authenticity, all these qualities that people want to see more in their leaders. And I think being very clear about your personal values and being willing to share those, I think that helps with all those things, because you want to take the mystery out of who are you as a boss, because you're always being studied by your direct reports. They're trying to figure out who you are. Like, are you moody? Like, are you happy? They're studying your body language. And the more you can sort of be upfront and say, look, this is who I am. This is my personal values. This is what's important to me. Then your direct reports can say, okay, I got that. Now I need to spend less time trying to figure you out, and I can spend more time getting my job done. And to me, that's a success on a lot of levels.
And so to that first point, why do you want to lead? You say it's very hard. You need to have a good why in place, as opposed to just, oh, well, hey, I'm doing pretty well and I like winning and achieving. So that's the next step. Let's just go ahead and do it. So that would be a lame or ineffective why, is almost no why. You're just sort of going with the flow. What would be some rich articulations of effective whys for leading?
The older I get, the more I like sentences that begin with, there's only 2 kinds of people, Pete.
Okay.
And sometimes those work, but I do think there's only 2 kinds of managers in the world, and only 2 kinds of leaders as well. But I think there's this sort of framework. It's not black or white. It's not one or the other. But I think some managers and leaders are more selfless and some are more self-centered. And I think, to me, the best leaders, the best managers are selfless. They're doing it because they want to help the team, the organization. They want to help their direct reports. And to me, like, that's not that there's a right answer, but I think really effective whys start there, that you believe in what the organization does. You can see the impact that the organization can have. And then you want to have impact as a leader. And I think that means like elevating people and making them better and helping build their skills and seeing trajectories for their career that maybe they didn't even see for themselves. I mean, I say in the book that leadership is complicated, and it's okay to have a complicated relationship with leadership. And I have in my career, I've been in plenty of roles where I was the number 2, and I was very happy in those roles. And I was in other roles where I was the leader. And to me, it wasn't about being number 1. I sort of kept my ego in check. And the thing that motivated me in all my management and leadership roles was I approached the job as a coach, right? I am here. I've learned a few things in my career, and I want to share them with you. And I want you to achieve like wild success. I want to help you get better. And that was my why in all those years.
And I'd love to get your take, having interviewed 1,000 CEOs, and I guess it's hard. You can't peer into their souls. But what's your sense of roughly what proportion of leaders are selfless versus self-centered?
If I could take your question and maybe reframe it slightly, it's like my understanding of their why, like, why are they doing this? Again, people are complicated. So there's like 1,000 layers of motivations. That said, I have noticed sort of patterns, and I put them into 3 or 4 broad categories. And because I've always been curious, and why do you want this job? I mean, a lot of One of the questions that I ask so many of the leaders that I interview, Pete, is like, where does your drive come from? Because I'm curious about that, because you need a certain amount of drive and stamina to do these big jobs. Like on paper, they're kind of awful jobs, right? I mean, they're just all consuming. There's a lot of responsibility. There's a lot of weight on your back. And so as I've tried to probe that, the patterns that I've seen, the first one is they grew up with some kind of adversity, and sometimes really tough adversity, right? I cannot tell you how many times I've heard really sad stories about growing up, and not just sort of financial straits, but, alcoholic parent, abusive parent. I've heard stories about growing up in a comfortable middle-class lifestyle. Mom stayed at home, dad worked, and then he died at a young age, and there was no life insurance. And suddenly the family was kind of scrambling to just put food on the table and pay the electric bill. One time I interviewed two CEOs back to back, and they said the exact same thing, told me the same life story that I just explained to you, right? So they had that kind of trauma, that adversity at a young age. They know what it felt like to be out of control. And so that was a big part of their drive and motivation. And again, not to sort of get too shrinky here, but I think, sometimes people, when they face a lot of adversity early in their life, they want to have a little bit more control. So maybe that helps explain part of their drive. I think another big category is some version of like the immigrant story, which is this idea of like the first in your family to do X. And I think if you grow up and you're always the first in your family to go to college, to do this, to do that, that you spend so much time kind of forging a new path that ultimately that just becomes like your comfort zone, right? And you need that kind of mindset as a leader. It's like you're always comfortable doing new things and dealing with new problems. I put another category, some people just like hit the parent lottery, like had a great family. Maybe they've got an interesting blend of DNA strands where, entrepreneur parent and the other one was a psychologist, or there was an engineering parent married to and the other parent was an artist. So you get that sort of interesting yin and yang, and just had sort of great messages and lessons growing up.
All right. Well, now I'm curious when it comes to the actual, let's say, okay, we got some great reasons. Folks are raring to go. They want to become a leader executive. Can you maybe start us with a story about someone who was not getting promoted? They wanted it, but then they made a switch in their approach and they pulled it off. They made the leap.
To me, a big part of making that leap, usually there's a story under there where people explain like, what was that moment? What was that mindset shift? And there's a few that come to mind. There's one executive I interviewed where she was moving up and she hit this point where she realized she couldn't do it all and she needed to delegate. And she had the insight that she had to start giving away the stuff that she really liked to do and that she was really good at, and so that she could then get to the next level. And I can really relate to that, because as people are moving up, we all have our the things we're really good at, our strengths and weaknesses. And we tend to really like to do the things that we're good at. But the point is, like, if you want to get up to that top leadership position, at some point you have to start giving that stuff away and letting other people do it. There was another moment from another executive where she had become sort of a new CEO of a startup, and she was going to the chair of the board and sort of running key decisions past the board chair. And at some point, the chairman just turned to her and said, look, like, I can give you my advice, but you need to realize, like, ultimately, this is your decision. And if you are wrong, we are going to fire you. Right. And it was just that sort of moment of clarity. It's like, because when you are a leader, part of the mindset is like, it's not about asking for permission anymore, right? To have that top job, you've got to own the accountability and you've got to own the outcomes of your decisions. And that's a big part to me of making the leap to leaders, being comfortable making decisions when the data isn't there, because the higher you move up, like, the decisions get harder. There's less data, there's more gray areas, there's more unhappy people. Whether you go left or right or up or down, you're going to make some people unhappy. And to me, a big part of leadership is being willing to make the decisions to take the risks and own the outcomes. Because honestly, Pete, I mean, there's just a lot of people who aren't comfortable doing that.
That's good to surface there. And I don't know if there's a recipe for how one gets comfortable doing that. Is there?
Well, I think it's being aware of the fact that it is your job to make those hard decisions. I reflect on conversation I had with one CEO. He was a first-time CEO, and he's just feeling like, wow, like every day is kind of a hard day, right? These problems are coming to my desk, and I don't really know what the answer is. And the light bulb went off for him where he realized this is my job. Right. And yes, it'd be nice to have like the easy decisions come to you, but they generally get taken care of farther down in the organization. So at some point, you have to make the shift and realize what may seem like a burden is an opportunity. It is your job. There are no easy days, and you need to see those tough decisions as interesting puzzles, because I do feel like we're just living through this breathtaking moment of change for all the obvious reasons, since the start of the pandemic. But I do think managing people and leading people has gotten 5 to 10 times harder. And in our consulting work at my firm, the Exco Group, we do see a lot of fast rising executives who are kind of tapping out and saying, look, I didn't sign up for how hard this is. And I think we are in this moment where it is kind of black or white. Like, we are not in this moment anymore where there's some playbook for leadership and how to have these new conversations about compassion and remote work and all these things. It's like, these are new and very hard problems for which there is no clear answer. And I think you need to do a gut check. It goes back to this idea of like, do you really want to lead? And you have to ask yourself, like, are you excited about this? Because if you're excited about it and say to yourself, what an amazing time to be managing and leading people, where we're figuring out the future of work, the future of leadership, and you have an opportunity to shape that and be a part of it. Wow, that's really exciting. So are you that kind of person, or are you saying to yourself, I just find like all these problems just kind of overwhelming. Everything seems so hard. The lines are blurring between the personal and professional. Everybody's kind of trying to figure out this new world of work and expectations. And I just find this all exhausting and somewhat overwhelming. And you need to be honest with yourself, because I do feel like we're at this moment where you really have to look at yourself in the mirror and say, leadership is getting harder. Managing is getting harder. Do you want to do this?
Okay. Well, now to dig into a couple of your particular concepts in the book, I was intrigued by, you've got a notion called the say-do ratio. What is that, and how do we perfect ours?
Sure. So the third section of the book is called How to Get Promoted Without Asking for a Promotion. And it's sort of, this is in your sweet spot of how to be awesome at your job, right? And how do you set yourself apart? Because if you are ambitious and you want to move up, the question at the core of that is, okay, how do you set yourself apart? And to me, one of the easiest ways to do it is to have a great do to say ratio. And that comes from CEO. I interviewed a guy named Brett Wilson. When I first heard it, kind of fell out of my chair, but what it means is like, what percentage of the things that you say you're going to do you actually do? And it's about reliability. It's about dependability. It's about your reputation. It's about trustworthiness. And I think if you want to set yourself apart, if you just have this rule that whatever you say you're going to do, that you follow through on. And if for some reason you can't, you tell people, it's like, hey, I know I promised you that, but this happened. I need an extra day. You're just upfront about it rather than letting them discover that you've missed the deadline. I think if you build a reputation as being super reliable and dependable, you can really set yourself apart. And the beauty of this is that it is so easy to improve. If, again, you got to be honest with yourself. Your listeners need to ask themselves, what is your do to say ratio? Is it really high? Or are there some things that you say you're going to do that you don't always follow through on? And the beauty of this, it's like a really easy hack to improve your do to say ratio, which is just whenever you say you're going to do something, just write it down. Make a note to yourself, your computer or Moleskine, you're on your phone. Doesn't matter where, just keep a list somewhere. And even the small stuff, right? If you say, oh, I'm going to connect you with that person and you follow through on it, like if you do that consistently, people are going to start thinking, it's like, wow, this person always does what they say they're going to do. And then that builds your reputation. And so you're going to get more responsibility because people just know you're that kind of person who's going to own it and deliver it.
Absolutely. You say that compartmentalization is a crucial art. What do you mean by that? And how do we get better at it?
Well, I think as you get higher in leadership positions, like the problems get harder. And as we've discussed, the decisions get more difficult. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to be second guessed. You're going to be criticized. Any decision you're going to make is going to leave somebody unhappy just because of all the trade-offs. And so I think a key skill of leadership is to be able to compartmentalize and to keep everything in perspective. Because if you're not good at that, what does that look like? It means like you're always beating yourself up for any wrong decisions or you don't take criticism well. You're always worrying about the impact of your decisions on other people. You're staring at the ceiling at 2 a.m. when you should be sleeping, and you're just not going to be an effective leader. And some people over-index the other way, Pete. I mean, I've certainly seen people who are so good at compartmentalizing. They basically means they have no empathy, right? Like they just let everything roll off their back and they don't seem to appreciate the impact of their decisions on people. And maybe that's not healthy either. But to me, being able to compartmentalize to sort of acknowledge the challenges, but then sort of keep them in a box in your mind so that it's like, okay, I've dealt with that. I'm thinking about that. I'm going to park this here and I'll come back to it later.
And if our compartmentalization art is not so artful, and we do tend to ruminate and, think about the thing that's not so handy, we'd prefer to have it compartmentalized. How do we get better at it?
Part of it is to let go of perfection, right? Because if things are chewing you up inside, it's first, you're not going to be perfect, and to give yourself a break. One of our mentors at my firm often shares this advice with like startup founders and stuff. And it's a great line. He says, look, if you talk to your friends the way you're talking to yourself, you wouldn't have any friends. And to me, that's a great point to keep in mind. It's like, you need to take care of yourself. And some people are very driven and they're really performance oriented and success oriented. If something doesn't go well, you can spend a lot of time beating yourself up, and you just need to let that go. And another trap that people fall into is that we want to be liked, right? Like, who doesn't? As a manager's leader, you want people to like you, and you need to let go of that as well. And shift from wanting people to like you to people respecting you. And it doesn't mean that it's fine if they don't like you, right? Because they're not going to follow you, but just to worry less about whether people like you. And I think if you just keep, for every decision you have to make, you can get chewed up about, well, is this the right thing to do? And it's going to affect this person this way and have these consequences. If you just run every decision that you face through a simple framework of like, what is the best for the company or the organization that I'm running or the team that I'm running? And that's a way of sort of simplifying and clarifying. And then you could probably sleep better at night and say, look, I know there's some disruption here. I know I've kind of created a blast zone, but I know this is the right decision for the organization. That's going to help you compartmentalize. So I think those are a couple of specific strategies.
All right. And how do you recommend we build our self-awareness muscle?
It starts with 5 words that I heard from a young CEO years ago. And it was one of those moments when she said it was kind of burned into my head. And the backstory was that she had a really rough childhood, very difficult relationship with her parents. They moved a lot. She was bullied at school, and she was sort of telling me about her life story. And at one point in the interview, I said, you have such a positive attitude. Where does that come from? And she said these 5 words. She said, reality is just source material. And what she meant is that, look, there is the reality of the things we experience, but it's just a reminder that we are always creating narratives for ourselves. We are constantly sort of editing the films of our experience and focusing on certain things to tell ourselves good stories, bad stories. And to me, it's such an important insight, because if you believe in the idea that reality is just source material and that we're always in effect telling ourselves stories, that it allows you to sort of step outside yourself a little bit and to ask yourself, like, wait a minute, what story am I telling myself about that experience? And is there another way to look at it? And I think that helps guard against some of the traps that people fall into in the stories they tell themselves. So one of the common traps is like the victim narrative, right? Stuff is happening to me, and you just start feeling like a victim when you should see everything as a learning opportunity, right? Reminds me of that expression I heard from one CEO, which is that 95% of the worst stuff that happens to you winds up being the best stuff that happens to you because you really learn from those experiences. It builds your character, gives you a lot of wisdom about life. So the victim narrative is one trap. The fairness or unfairness narrative is another trap. You can often feel like in organizations, things aren't fair. And it's just a matter of like, look, reality is what it is. And if you really push yourself, it's like, am I thinking about this in the most productive way? Am I seeing everything as an opportunity? Because to me, that's one of the things that really separates entrepreneurs. I've interviewed hundreds of entrepreneurs and they are wired slightly differently. And I think one of the key ways is they don't sort of dwell on bad news. It's like everything's an opportunity. What's the plan B? What's the plan C here? And they just keep pushing forward. So to me, like those are a couple of the key things to keep in mind just to help build that self-awareness muscle.
Okay. And any thoughts on politics, office politics, networking, trickery?
Well, there's politics in every organization, especially the organizations that like to say we don't have any politics. And the one tip that I always keep in mind with politics is you really need to understand what the other person's scoreboard is in their head for their own success. To me, that's the secret to understanding office politics, because as much as companies like to say there's a shared scoreboard and everybody's going to work together as a team, the reality is that everybody's got their own part of that, right? And everybody's building their part of the business, and they tend to focus almost with blinders on about that. And so to me, one of the ways to sort of help you navigate politics is always start by understanding what is the other person's scoreboard. Because if you understand what is their scoreboard, then you're much more likely to have clarity about how you can help them and how you can kind of find a common ground. So that's my best insight about politics. And I would also say about networking. I mean, I don't know about you, Pete, but I'm an introvert. I don't like the idea of networking. That's sort of like there's 20 people over there, just go mingle during drinks before a conference. That makes me really uncomfortable and I'm not good at it. But I think it's important to build your network. And if you focus on how do you build your network, to me, the most effective way to do it is not just, hey, can we have a coffee or you want to grab a drink or something? To me, the most effective way is to do things with people, to build something together, just be on a committee with them, to do some project together. Maybe it's outside your day job or something. But to me, like that's the way to sort of really cement those relationships. And, whether it's with colleagues internally or like maybe serving on a board or part of an organization outside your company. But the way to build your lasting network so those relationships really last is to do something with people rather than just share a coffee.
All right. Well, Adam, tell me anything else you want to make sure to mention before we shift gears and hear about some of your favorite things?
I'm over to you, Pete.
All right. Now, could you give us a favorite quote, something you find inspiring?
I mentioned the earlier one from Ruth Simmons about always be prepared at any point in your life to learn the most important lesson of your life. That's one of my favorites. The other favorite is play in traffic. And whenever people are asking me for career advice, I often mention that. And what it means is just like get out there and do stuff. Meet people, get involved, just start doing things, play in traffic, and you're going to build those connections that are going to lead to things. I think about that often because I think sometimes people, when they're first starting out their careers, they tend to have very specific ideas about their career plans. Like by this age, I want to make this much money. I want to have this title. And it's sort of very linear, but that's not how life works. Your career path is going to be shaped much more by the people you meet, the people you work with, people you connect with. And so you really just want to get out there and meet a lot of people in the context of work and doing things. And that's why I love that expression, play in traffic.
All right. And a favorite study or experiment or bit of research?
There is a study about capuchin monkeys. And if your listeners look it up, capuchin monkeys fairness study. And it's this great video about two monkeys in cages and they're fed like a cucumber versus a grape, and sort of how the two monkeys react to getting either the grape or the cucumber. It's just a powerful reminder of how, as human beings, one of our triggers is fairness. It's a hilarious video.
All right. And a favorite book?
I love Into the Heart of the Sea. I mean, it's a great, book about whaling that got made into a movie. I love books about sort of adventure and resilience and what people do like in really tough circumstances. I often go back to that.
And a favorite tool? Something you use to be awesome at your job?
I'd probably say my recorders because I've done 1,000 interviews. So, that's probably my Swiss Army knife. It all starts with that.
Well, now I need to know. Recorders, we're talking about like an external.
Yeah, I'm a lot older than you, Pete. So I grew up using external recorders. And yeah,
oh, sure.
I know.
Well, it's handy when you're out and about. Sure.
Exactly. I'm dating myself, but yeah.
No, I have one as well. So, and a favorite habit?
Probably the best habit, maybe not my favorite. It's just like, it's just about exercising every day, like trying to go out for a run. And to me, like, that's how I kind of stay centered and blow off steam. And I will share that I basically listen to the same playlist every time I go for a run. It's not because I'm listening to the music. It's like, I like to have music, but to me, it's just background noise. It's kind of like a green screen that I can think against. I probably just overshared there, but that's...
Oh, no, actually, that's perfect. And I would like to know a couple of the tracks on the playlist.
There's Dave Matthews in there. There's U2, John Legend. I mean, it's a pretty eclectic mix, I have to say.
Okay. And is there a particular nugget you share that really seems to connect and resonate with folks? They repeat it back to you often?
One thing that I share, like an important insight from me, and it goes back to, there's a famous interview question that Peter Thiel, the entrepreneur, is pretty famous for asking people, which is like, what do you believe that 95% of the world disagrees with you on? And I think it's a great way at sort of getting at creative thinking and stuff. And I have to say, like, it was important insight for me that I think the world has it completely wrong in the following way, that the world tends to refer to children as young adults. And I think it's backwards because I think adults are older children. And I think if we sort of all acknowledge that and recognize that, and that people bring their little red wagon of stuff into work, and we're all motivated by a lot of the same things that kids are motivated by, like, you want to go first, that's not fair, let me do myself, all those reactions that kids have, adults have them too. So I think it's just it's a good sort of unified field theory of understanding human behavior.
Okay. And if folks want to learn more, get in touch, where would you point them?
My personal website is adambryantbooks.com, and my firm is the XCO Group, but our website is XCO Leadership, EXCO Leadership.com.
And you have a final challenge or call to action for folks looking to be awesome at their jobs?
I think a huge underrated superpower of leadership is listening. I think most people are not that good at listening, and I think our devices are making it worse. But I just think if you want to be awesome at your job and separate yourself, I think it's about being a good listener, and it's a muscle that you can practice all day long in your personal life, your professional life. And again, if the goal is to set yourself apart, I think being a good listener is one way to do it. And plus, you're going to learn a lot more if you're a good listener.
All right. Adam, this has been a treat. I wish you much fun and many good leaps.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Pete.
I really love that question from Adam. Do you really want to lead? And Pat Lencioni brought up a similar point associated with, if you've got the right motivations and intentions, great things happen. And if you don't, some not so great things can happen. So take a moment to check yourself before you wreck yourself. Good warning from Adam. Again, the show notes, the transcript, and the links to items we've referenced are at awesomeatyourjob.com/EP886. Hope to catch you next time. And peace.
Thanks for listening. To get the most out of the show, we recommend 2 key things. First, check out the extra resources at awesomeatyourjob.com. You can find this episode's transcript and links, as well as the perfect episode for your situation. You can search the full text transcripts of hundreds of episodes or explore episodes tagged by topic and competency covered. Second, subscribe to the podcast and get future episodes automatically. You can subscribe by telling Siri and several other smartphones and speakers, subscribe to the How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast, or by tapping subscribe in your podcast player of choice. If you'd like some extra help figuring out podcasts and how subscriptions work, visit awesomeatyourjob.com/subscribe for guidance. Hope to catch you on the next episode of How to Be Awesome at Your Job.
Look around. You can find cars like these on AutoTrader. New cars, used cars, electric cars, maybe even flying cars. Okay, no flying cars, but as soon as they get invented, they'll be on AutoTrader. Just you wait. AutoTrader.